Hello. For this game design analysis, I chose Baldur's Gate 3 and analyzed it using the MDA framework, which stands for Mechanics, Dynamics, and Aesthetics. I chose this game because it is one of the clearest modern RPG examples of systems working together really well. Instead of separating combat, story exploration, and character building into isolated features, Baldur's Gate 3 makes them overlap. Because of that, players' choices feel meaningful in several ways at once. My main argument is that Baldur's Gate 3 succeeds because its mechanics are highly interconnected. Those mechanics create dynamics of experimentation, role-playing, and tactical planning, and those dynamics lead to strong player experiences like agency, tension, discovery, immersion, and accomplishment. Before getting into the game itself, I want to briefly define the framework. Mechanics are the rules, systems, and features designed by the developers. In an RPG, that includes things like combat rules, leveling systems, dialogue checks, inventory systems, or exploration tools. Dynamics are the behaviors that emerge when players interact with those mechanics. For example, players might conserve rare resources, scout before battle, or build a party around synergy. Aesthetics are the emotional experiences created by those dynamics. These can include suspense, mastery, curiosity, immersion, or narrative engagement. So the important part is the mechanics do not directly create emotion by themselves. They first shape behavior, and that behavior is what creates the player experience. The first major system I want to analyze is combat. The mechanics here include turn-based initiative movement, actions, bonus actions, reactions, spell slots, consumables, environmental surfaces, and elevation. These rules make each turn feel limited and valuable. From those mechanics, several important dynamics emerge. Players begin to scout before fights, position carefully, and decide what to spend or save powerful abilities. They also start using environment strategically. For example, instead of only attacking during players directly, players might ignite grease, push enemies off ledges, or combine spells with terrain. These dynamics create some of the game's strongest aesthetics. The biggest one is the tactical tension, because every turn matters and every poor decision can be costly. Another is mastery, because success often comes from understanding how systems combine rather than just having high numbers. Finally, combat creates accomplishment, because victories feel earned through planning and improvisation. So in MDA terms, the combat mechanics create a dynamic of resource-aware strategy and that produces tension and satisfaction, which is really cool. The second major system is dialogue. The mechanics include branching conversation trees, persuasion and intimidation checks, class and race tags, visible dice rolls, and persistent consequences tied to the quest state. This means dialogue is not just story delivery, it is a rule-based system. The dynamics that emerge from this are really interesting. Players begin to role-play through their build because identity affects what options they have. A bard, cleric, rogue, or barbarian can approach the same scene in a completely different way. Also, because failed rolls often redirect the story instead of ending it, players are encouraged to accept uncertainty instead of forcing a perfect outcome every time. The aesthetic produced by this system includes suspense, because the important dialogue rules feel risky, and narrative ownership, because players feel like their version of the story is actually theirs. It also increases replay value, since the different character identities lead to different paths and outcomes. What I find especially strong here is the failure is often treated as alternate content rather than wasted content. That design choice is what makes dialogue feel alive instead of fragile. The third major system is the party and progression structure. The mechanics include a 4-character party, class and subclass choices, feats, equipment loadouts, companion approval, personal quest lines, and camp scenes. So progression is not only about numbers, it is also about relationships and long-term identity. The resulting dynamics include building the party around synergy, balancing emotional preference with tactical efficiency, and investing in companions over time. Players are constantly deciding who fits their strategy, who they enjoy traveling with, and how they want their group to function together. These dynamics create aesthetic-like attachment, identity, and payoff. Players become attached to companions because those characters matter in both gameplay and narrative scenes. Identity grows because the party reflects players' values and strategy. And payoff happens because choices are made early in the game, becoming more meaningful later, both mechanically and emotionally. This is one of the reasons why Baldur's Gate 3 feels stronger than RPGs, where most party members are mostly just combat units. In this game, the party is part of the emotional design. The fourth major system is exploration. The mechanics here include stealth routes, vertical traversal, hidden areas, traps, perception checks, lockpicking, destructible objects, and alternate entrances. Many maps are designed with multiple possible approaches. These mechanics create dynamics where players observe before acting instead of always charging forward. They often scout, search for hidden paths, position for ambushes, or even avoid combat entirely. Exploration becomes a form of planning. The aesthetics produced here are discovery, wonder, surprise, and immersion. Players feel rewarded for curiosity because the environment often contains meaningful information or alternate solutions. The world feels more believable because it behaves like a usable place rather than just a backdrop. This is a strong example of how environmental design can support role-playing. Different players can approach the same space in very different ways, and the game usually supports that flexibility. So how the underlying system likely works. From a technical perspective, Baldur's Gate 3 is impressive because its systems appear to be interoperable. Combat likely depends on a turn manager, pathfinding, line of sight checks, status effect logic, and utility-based AI behavior. Dialogue likely depends on graph-based conversation nodes, condition checks for class, race, and quest state, and a dice resolution system. Progression is probably data-driven, which makes classes, spells, feats, and items easier to manage consistently. Quests likely use persistent flags and state machines so the game can remember what happened and react later. The key technical insight is that these systems seem to update the same persistent world state. That matters because it allows combat, dialogue, and exploration to influence one another. Without that shared state, the player's choices would feel separated and less believable. So technically, the game's strongest aesthetic depends on reliable system integration. Even the strongest games have weaknesses, and one of the clearest tensions in Baldur's Gate 3 involves resting. The game uses long rests to restore resources and trigger important companion scenes. This is mechanically useful and narratively rewarding, but at the same time, the story often communicates urgency around major threats. This creates a little bit of a mismatch. The narrative says time matters, but the mechanics often suggest that frequent resting is safe. This does not ruin the game, but it slightly weakens immersion because the player's best strategic choice does not always match the story's sense of danger. My design improvement would be a narrative-aware rest system. The idea is to tag quests as stable, urgent, or timed. Only quests that are meant to be sensitive to time would advance when the small player takes a long rest. Before resting, the game could give a warning if an urgent outcome might change. I would also add a small cue to show when the companion camp scenes are waiting, so players don't really feel like they need to rest repeatedly just to avoid missing relationship content. Technically, this could be implemented as a layer on top of existing quest state systems. It would most likely require additional metadata, clear UI communication, and even check-tied resting. I believe this would improve the game because it aligns mechanics with narrative pacing more closely. It keeps players' freedom, but it makes sure that time pressure is more believable and better communicated. In conclusion, Baldur's Gate 3 is a strong example of the MDA framework because it designs its system deeply systematic. Its mechanics such as combat rules, dialogue checks, progression systems, and exploration tools create dynamics of experimentation, role-playing, and strategic planning. Those dynamics then produce aesthetic-like agency, tension, discovery, immersion, and accomplishment. The game is especially successful because its systems reinforce each other. A choice made in dialogue can affect the quest, which can change combat, which can affect companion relationships. The level of integration is why the experience feels so rich. My proposed narrative-aware rest system would improve the game by making pacing and urgency feel more coherent. So overall, Baldur's Gate 3 shows that great RPG design is not about having many mechanics, it is also about connecting those mechanics in a way that creates meaningful behavior and meaningful experience. Thank you.